thanks everybody for attending today's Power Lunch. We're going to do something a little bit different than what we usually do. We're going to be having in honor of Cybersecurity Month, which is almost over. We're going to be having a security roundtable, which should be pretty interesting. I've observed a couple of other security roundtables, and a lot of those involve kind of shooting facts at people and a kind of information overload. We're going to take a little bit of a different tack. I think we're not going to have death by PowerPoint, so that's not going to happen. And we want this to be a little bit more interactive and conversational and hopefully meaningful, because I think some of those facts get to be a little bit redundant, and I don't know how actionable some of those things are. So we want to try to have content that's interesting and provides a little bit of information for people. And if we go over something that has more interest or you have more questions, definitely contact us and we can get you in touch with the right people to help you along the way. So with that, I think that I'd like to go through and introduce our panel. Everybody knows me, whether that's good or bad, I don't know. I'm Keith from NetVPro. I'll be the dancing monkey for today's presentation. I have a background in IT. I've done some IT stuff. I was a heavy equipment operator. I actually worked in a candy store. My experience is wide and varied, but for today, that doesn't matter. We have three panelists. We have Paul Barrett, George Court, and Kenneth Romer with us, and I'll kind of we'll go around the horn and let them kind of give a brief introduction of who they are and what they mean in the security space. So I'll start with Paul. Go ahead, Paul, kind of give us an idea who you are.
Okay, great. I'm Paul Barrett from NetVPro. I started NetVPro 10 years ago. Before that, I actually was a security administrator at Brown County, and that was kind of like jumping in the pool with no paddles kind of thing. So I backed off from that security position. But as a small business owner, that's my perspective now, is trying to secure NetVPro. What are the tools that I need to equip my team, my people? I have people in 3 different states, not just state of mind, physical states. So security is really a top of my mind to keeping, NetVPro safe, and on top of that, all our customers safe. So that's my introduction, Paul, from NetVPro.
All right, next let's go to George Court. George, a little bit about who you are and your business, Digital Nomads.
Okay, was having some technical difficulties. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Basically, Digital Nomads and myself, I've been in IT since basically the early to mid 90s. I've always had a desire to always learn that next new thing. And for the last 20 years or so, I've spent most of my time in the financial industry at higher levels of administration and supervisory in the IT space, dealing with the security, perimeter security, internal. And I started Digital Nomads for the sole fact that just because you're a small business doesn't mean you need a jaw-dropping solution. A lot of times it doesn't have to be the fanciest product on the street, but sometimes just behavioral changes, policy, or simple changes in how you deal with your way of doing business. But what I have really found was the need to customize a solution to the business, and that's the skills and focus that I bring, is to make security usable as opposed to a hindrance to the business.
Very good. Thank you, George. And then we have Ken Romer from ITMS. Ken, why don't you give us an overview of who you are and what you're about?
Okay. My name is Ken Romer. I'm with ITMS. We do cybersecurity consulting and testing. Started my IT career back in '97 as a network administrator for Computer Sciences Corporation, working on something called the JCALS project. From there in 2000, went to work for company called Marlin Leasing, which has now become Marlin Business Services out of Mount Laurel, New Jersey. and worked my way up to be the director of the IT department. About 2010, we started ITMS, started out as part-time and finally went full-time in 2013, and have been doing that full-time ever since. So that's a basic rundown on my career path.
All right, thank you. As always, folks, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We can also be conversational, so unmute yourself and you can ask your question, because we do want to have, we value interactions as well. So if there's something you have a question with, you can either, like I said, put it in the chat section and we'll make sure we monitor that and ask the guys, or just feel free to ask it and be part of the conversation. Happy to do that, and happy to have people's experiences and as part of the conversation. So again, thanks guys for your introductions, and I just want to in general start us off with kind of a broad question of, and not directed to any one person, but in general, what do you think, what are your thoughts on the current threat landscape that we face today? I know with COVID, there's a lot of things going on, but what do you guys see as the current threat landscape? And maybe I'll shoot her over to Ken to kind of start it off.
Well, COVID has really changed things a little bit, in the sense that the biggest way people got into your company was through phishing. So, but with all the advent of RDP being put up and not really being secured, and not really a secure method into your network, that's become the easiest way to get in. A lot of the government agencies, especially down in the Florida area, that's how they're being broken into, is through their RDP connections. So that's one of the major things. And ransomware has just changed the outlook of cybersecurity. And what created ransomware was cyber money, cyber coins, Bitcoin, stuff like that, cybersecurity. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
George, do you have any thoughts or anything to add to that?
Well, it used to be very simple. Simple in the concept of you had a perimeter in the past. When people were at work, you had your firewalls, you had your IDS, you had your company policies wrapped around all of that, which made it very simple from a, where is my border? Where is my delineation of, I am protecting what's inside this realm. Now that COVID, we have really blown away that border, and now we've punched holes into that to allow people to work remotely. The downside is a lot of times those were done in haste. A lot of forethought was not always put into securing those endpoints. And now you have a trusted device outside of your network that is connecting back in, but they're on an untrusted internet. So we've really expanded our threat landscape just because of the expansion of teleworking and needing to support that.
Right. Yeah, I think you guys are right. There's a lot more in play. Paul, do you have anything to add to those thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, for like NetVPro, we actually have equipment in 3 different co-locations across the U.S. So not only do I have to worry about security of my people, and now I have to worry about security into the data centers and that equipment that runs 24/7, 7 days a week, that is accessible to our customers for DR and replication and backup. But it's also a target, because we advertise, so we have to secure that on top of everything else. And so the other morning I wake up to, hey, our website is breached, and I'm like, what? I wasn't even worried about our website. So we quickly took action, secured our website. We will be contacting our customers to make sure that what we've learned through our experience, we're sharing with our customers, make sure that their websites are secure.
Yeah, it definitely has. Oh, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I saw a chat message come up, and I apologize. I used an acronym and didn't identify it. RDP is Remote Desktop Protocol. It's built into Microsoft. So that's what makes it so easy to put up an RDP server. And the other thing is, My camera's down here, but my monitor's up there, so it looks like I'm staring into space. I apologize.
All right, very good. Yeah, good point. Thank you for defining that acronym. You know, and Paul, it kind of a good segue into the next question that I had anyway. You know, what threats keep you awake at night? What things are, you know, we know that there's a lot of things going on. We know there's a lot of threats, but is there something that really one flavor or another that kind of keeps you awake, keeps you nervous?
Yeah, for me, it's customers that matter to me. So I hesitate because, like I said, I do everything I can within my power, and I'm always looking for solutions, and that's why we're having a security roundtable. So I'm interested what the actual experts have to say.
All right, George, what are your thoughts? Is there one threat over another, or something new that keeps you awake at night from a security perspective?
Yeah, the plugged-in computer. There is no such thing as a secure computer unless it is completely unplugged. In all honesty, though, the truth of the matter is the social engineering aspects for phishing, for the ransomwares, those are what concern me the most, because it doesn't matter how much we put into technological improvements, there's always going to be the human factor
Yep.
of someone being curious or getting spooked by a well-placed or well-written email, and then, you know,
Well, humans being the weak link, and then I think one of the things is that those types of attacks have become much more clever. I mean, you really have to have a discerning eye with some of those to see the difference between a real email and something that's spoofed. It really has become a challenge, and the bad guys have gotten more clever.
well, about
Ken,
2 years ago, they started using spell check. So it was a lot harder to tell the fake ones from the real ones once they started actually checking their grammar.
right. Ken, do you have what's keeping you awake at night, Ken?
Well, I would say it's the users, your internal users. I do some ransomware. I call it ransomware testing. It's really a phishing test, and it's a pretty, by what you can get out there today's standards, it's pretty cheesy. You know, I'll have ESPN_com@yahoo.com, and I'll send this alert out and have a bogus URL in it that doesn't match up when you hover over it, and people still click on it, and it's just blatantly wrong.
Ken, I think you make a great point. One of the challenges is, like, from an IT technology perspective, one of the challenges is helping people believe that it's a real threat
Mhm.
before they have a bad event, right? I mean, because
Yeah.
people, like, I think they think it can't happen to them. They have kind of this false sense of security, you know, and it's like, how do you make it real before it's really real? That's one of the things that I think all of us struggle with, is how do we help people, like, care about it? You know, I
Mhm.
think that's a great point.
Well, I think
I
the only
looked
way
at,
that happens is if something happens to somebody they know before it happens to them, or something happens to them, but by then it might be too late.
Right.
yeah,
Right. Well, that
I
kind of.
was
Oh, go ahead,
going to
George.
just, I was just going to throw in the, my experience has been like the snake bites you. You shouldn't have to wait for the snake to bite you before you consider the snake a threat. But that's usually what ends up happening.
Right. Right. Well,
I'm going to
that's,
steal that analogy.
yeah, that's a good one. So, George, I guess I'm going to
I'll
throw
give you
this one.
licensing.
Right. I'm going to throw this one to you, George, to start with, anyways. So, where does a small business start? I mean, we've talked about some pretty scary stuff, and this applies. You know, these things apply to really all businesses. I mean, if I'm looking at it, and I think that everybody knows. I mean, everybody knows security is important. It's been out there long enough. I don't think it's an afterthought, but a lot of times it becomes overwhelming. There's this cascade of information of, you know, bad guy, bad guy, bad guy, blah blah blah. Kind of like, you know, election stuff. We're just waiting for the election to be over. Doesn't matter what party you are. You just are on information overload. If you're a small business, where do you start with this stuff? I mean, I think that's a common question: is how do I even start down the road?
Well, one of the things you actually touched on in what you had said, security cannot be an afterthought. You have to be thinking in terms of what is it that I am trying to build? What I have seen is a lot of businesses grow organically, which is they're more focused on expanding, getting the new employees on board. They're not thinking about how do we properly do this, and a lot of it is just making a intelligent step forward, either through talking, doing some research. Biggest thing I see is very few businesses use the principle of least privilege. If you have someone that is coming on as an intern, don't give them privilege to everything. But it's just simple things that can really save you in the long run. But the hard part is once you go down that path of just growing quickly and not putting security in place, trying to fix it afterwards becomes 1,000 times harder, because now you got to try to bring everything back. And now you're rebuilding the whole, basically an analogy that I think you've even used before, Keith, is trying to fix the airplane while you're in flight. I mean, it becomes a lot more complicated and a lot more tedious to try to do that. So baby steps, and then always just look at least privilege.
Ken George brings up a great point there, and that is, and the question of where do you start? A good place to start is just contemplating your policies, right?
Yeah, I would say, computer policies or network policies are very important. Being like computer usage policy is one, patching policy, knowing what your plans are. Put those things together. Just keep in mind, when you put a policy together and you present that to auditors, you better be doing it. You can't just write these things down and say, oh, we have these policies, but we don't enforce any of it, or we don't monitor it in any fashion. It becomes useless. And if you get an auditor coming in, I used to have SOX audits all the time, and Federal Reserve Board audits, SOX being Sarbanes-Oxley, and Federal Reserve Board audits all the time because we had a bank. If we weren't following our policies, they would come in, they'd start looking at your stuff, and then they find out, well, you're not following your patch management policy or your termination policy. Then they start digging into you, and they really start digging into everything really deep. So you want to make sure whatever you put in paper, you do.
Right. I think that's a good point. In my past, I've been under HIPAA audits and PCI audits for credit card industry. And whenever we'd have auditors in, I'd go through a lot of chocolate. Chocolate and that's what I put on my dancing monkey suit and try to be distracted. But yeah, auditors don't have a sense of humor when you're not paying attention to your controls or those things that you have in your policies. But I think that policies are a way, as a business, if it has to be important to you, like the panel said earlier, it has to be important to you. And if it's something that is important to you, that's something being security, policies are a way that you can get down the road, you can start down the road and get a good chunk of improvement done without spending a lot of money. Now,
Right.
I don't know, I was going to just kick her over to Paul. I see, George, did you have a comment on that?
I was just going to say, not to take you away from Paul, but if you're curious about policies, SANS, SANS, they actually have a section of policy templates available for free that you can use as a starting point. And they are very decent to get you in that space, to get the ball rolling and that discussion started for any business if you don't have anything already going for that.
Right. No, there are resources out there that don't necessarily need to cost, that can get you started down the road. Paul, from an MSP perspective, NetVPro does some security stuff, but from a MSP perspective, what types of things, if someone comes to you and they're kind of they know they need something with security, but they don't know what that is. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what you recommend as the first step for a business who comes to you with concerns.
So at NetVPro, I've always taken a stance of we focus on protecting your data in a way with backup. So we check people's backups, we confirm that they're working, and if they're not, the first step we implement what we feel is our favorite type of backup, and then we test that, and we talk about having it off-site. It's kind of the 3-2-1 rule we use. 3-2-1 is 3 copies of your data, 2 different medias, 1 offsite. That's where we start. And then once we have good protection of their production data and their virtual machines, then we start diving into the basics. What are the basics? Do you have an up-to-date antivirus? What is it being updated every day? And then on top of that, can we monitor it so we know it's always happening? That's where we start.
So what I hear you saying is that a valuable tool in the whole process, no matter where you are, is kind of doing an evaluation, so that as a business you have it. I mean, everybody knows they need security. That's not a secret. I think that people have that sense. Their spider sense tingles. But one of the challenges is like what to do with it. And I think that having somebody help you or being able to do an assessment is an important thing, and it helps you identify and talk about the gaps you might have. Ken, did you have something to add?
Yeah, when it comes to most IT departments, yeah, they understand that security is important. The problem is getting the C-level to buy into security. They don't want to spend any money. They don't see it as a worthwhile investment. They see it just as an expense. In fact, the IT department in general is a lot of times just like, oh, that's just a cost center. That just costs us money. They don't see that your uptime is 99.9999% and everything's running fine. All they see is that once in a blue moon problem. So like, oh, why do we need security? Why do we need to spend all this money? Until they have a problem, then it's like, oh, now we know why.
Right. And I think that an interesting thing in this too is that having a third party help you with that can be an important thing to help the C-suite latch onto or get their arms around security, because sometimes I can, as an internal IT resource in my past existence, sometimes it's effective to have a third party come in and either validate what you've said or to provide a different perspective, because sometimes when we're working in our day-to-day IT space, we get familiar with what we're doing, and I don't want to say blinders, but we get somewhat comfortable or tuned in with our own space. The nice thing about a third party is they've seen a lot of different areas and they can bring a different perspective to it, and that can be very valuable, especially from a C-suite perspective. George, did you have something to add?
Yeah, two things. On the backups, like Paul said, one of the arguments I make for ensuring backups is, what insurance do you have for your business? If there's a fire, you have building insurance, you have property flood damage insurance, you have all of these insurances. What insurance do you have for your data? If you were to lose all of the data for your business, how much is that going to cost you to try to build back up again? That is the biggest argument I use for backups, because a lot of businesses don't realize how dependent they are on their data. And then the other point that Ken was talking about, the C-suite, a lot of times they will always put, or not always, but they'll more times than not consider IT under accounting as a cost center. They don't look at it as being able to save money. They don't look at it as the departments would be billed back from IT for the services. They just look at it as, okay, IT is costing us this much a year. And if you're doing your job right in IT, they usually don't notice that you're doing much at all. So then they start saying, boy, do we really need these people anymore?
Yeah.
So that's the downside.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, George provided a good segue there, and I'm going to kind of throw it to Paul. And I don't know, Ken and George, you guys can also contribute. But Paul, can you talk a little bit about cybersecurity insurance? And I don't know if we want to go into detail because that's probably a show or a segment in and of itself. But can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think that's something that's becoming, maybe I'll say, more popular, or people are looking into it. So can you give a little bit about cybersecurity insurance?
Yeah, I mean, actually, we're capable of recommending cyber security insurance at this point in time, especially through some of the tools that we utilize to protect our customers' information. So like Ken said, if you have a policy that says what you're doing, on top of that policy, the insurance company is going to send you a questionnaire and say, are you doing these things? And you check off that, yes, we have a patching policy and we're doing that. And then you have a breach and it turns out you're not doing that, or you're not doing change control or things like that, then they have the capability of denying your claim, even if you already had and been paying for insurance. So you have to be really careful about when you fill out your questionnaire.
Ken, go ahead.
To piggyback on what Paul just said, I absolutely agree with that. But also, cyber insurance policies, if you look at them, a lot of these people that have policies, to get it affordable, never covers anywhere near the cost of the breach. So you might still be out, you might say you have a $500,000 policy. They might not pay it because insurance companies are in the business of collecting premiums and not making payments. But it might still leave you with a balance of $400,000 or $500,000 to get your data back. And can you still afford that? I mean, that would still put a lot of companies out of business.
Right. George, did you have something?
Well, plus, just tagging on to Kenneth there, you also have, we'll just keep doing round robin with that. You also have not just the damage that is a financial to your business as far as recovering data and such, you also have the reputation damage, which can affect your business a lot longer in either other businesses that don't want to do business with you because that this happened, customer loss or retention issues because of the breach and the issues that were caused.
We actually have there's a good question here with regard to the insurances. When you're investigating it, when you're looking into getting the cybersecurity or the security insurance, is there a specific, or is there a way you should ask about it? In other words, are you asking for IT insurance? Are you asking for data recovery insurance? Is there a certain phraseology or an approach to make sure that you're getting the right thing? And you think you're buying a Chevy, but you end up with a Yugo. You don't want to do that. You don't want to find out, it won't matter until it matters, then it really matters. So going into it, is there something that you should ask for specific, or is it just known in the industry? Maybe I'll start with Paul or Ken or whoever. Okay, Ken, go ahead.
Well, I look at it this way. If you're getting a policy, it's going to be full of a lot of legal mumbo jumbo. You really need to take that to a good attorney, and preferably an attorney that has some kind of technology background that can read through that and tell you exactly what you're getting. Because if you don't, and you just sign, and you don't really understand what you're signing, like any other contract, you could spend a lot of money in premiums for 5 years, and then in year 6, when you go to collect, sorry.
I would say that there's such a wide variety that I have not seen cyber insurance policies really standardized to like cookie cutter approaches. So you definitely have to do your research and get the proposals from the different agencies and really look them over to see what they do and don't cover and what your limitations are going to be, because they are not like car insurance. There's no set standards of, this is the base package that everyone really carries.
So would you guys recommend, I'm not sure, Paul, if you have anything to add to that, but I'm going to throw in a question. Would you recommend that a business work with their IT provider or an IT provider of their choosing to help them make sure they've included the right things, or a security provider of their choosing separate from the issuer? Or how does that work, so they make sure that the important things are covered? So if you have an owner, a business owner, somebody who's not intimately familiar with the security game, how do they make sure that they have the right things covered? Anyone can feel free to answer that one.
Was that directed at anybody?
Not specifically, but Ken, if you spoke first.
Yeah, I think if you can't find an attorney that's knowledgeable in that area, yeah, you should definitely bring in someone like Paul, myself, George, to discuss what your needs are, what your concerns are, because there's, like you said, there's a lot of different facets. You might cover ransomware in your policy, but you don't recover data recovery. You don't recover downtime or anything like that. Or you don't recover all the cost that's going to be involved in getting all your clients that got exposed safe and sound.
Yeah. You would also look at this as a risk analysis. What is the likelihood? What would it cost? What would it amortize out at? And is that a risk that you are willing to, do you have an appetite for that risk and say, yeah, we can accept this over the course of the next 5 years? Our likelihood is once in 5 years. Well, let's break it out and see, is that something that we are willing to spend? I mean, that's what it really boils down to, is what is your comfort level with the risk that you're accepting? Are you going to really defer it or not? And that's where bringing someone that can kind of do the technical mumbo jumbo, if you're not comfortable with it, and kind of meet with you to explain what is and is not your primary concerns for that.
Right. Okay, maybe, and I think that it's interesting to me. We've generated some good questions on this. Maybe we need to do a whole power lunch on cybersecurity insurance. It seems like there's some interest in that. We could do a little bit deeper of a dive in that. I want to pivot to get a couple more things done. I'd like to pivot right now and just ask the group, what do you guys see as the emerging technology that has the most impact on security right now in a positive way? So is there an emerging technology, or is there a technology out there today or coming out that you see as being greatly impactful in the security space? Paul, I'll let you take first crack at it.
So yeah, I mean, obviously, being in IT and being an owner, I've been working with security professionals like Ken and George, and looking at a lot of different solutions, testing them out, seeing if they make sense. I mean, as you know, we've talked about zero trust in the past. I really have focused right now. NetVPro is on threat hunting. So that's collecting all the logs, collecting all the information, and reacting to a breach, and finding out, if there's a breach happening, can we mitigate it? Can we stop it before it spreads?
George, is there a technology that you're thrilled about right now?
The interesting part is there's so many technologies. Everyone's trying to be the first one to outdo the next. I don't get too excited about something that just came out till it's been out for a little while and has had the tires kicked on it, and actually see how it performs. Ultimately, though, the biggest things that I look at as far as newer technologies are the more intelligent protections that you can put in, either a zero trust, like Paul said, for your desktops, firewalls that are more intelligent to be able to identify what the traffic is going through them and allow you some easier and better ways of controlling that. For the last few years, I've actually taken the focus as, I know the perimeters are safe. I'm now looking internal to the networks, trying to see if someone's already there trying to get out. So the downside is, for the paradigms really shifted. It used to be all external trying to get in. Now we have to also assume there might be a advanced persistent threat in our network, and we have to look for those weird connections out from time to time. And logging is a big thing. Not always something that home users can do, but there are alternatives for small businesses that are not going to be anything that's going to break the bank.
Sure. Ken, is there anything that you're excited about, either on the market or that you see coming down the road? Is there any technology that excites you?
I'll take a slightly different slant and take it from the opposite perspective. Things that are coming out now from the hacker's perspective are really where the innovation is. We're always behind. They can get malware into your system by encrypting the payload in. Once it gets in there, it loads in the RAM, and it opens up a TLS connection out, which all looks normal to the inside of the network. They won't see any of it, and it just sits there in RAM, so you're not really getting to it. And then it's just got a encrypted connection out. They don't know what the data is going in and out. They can't tell. It's connecting back to a command and control center, and then they just start, making lateral moves within your network. So we're always trying to play catch up to what they're doing. And unfortunately, software is rarely designed with security in mind. It's designed, I want someone to be able to use this easily. And then security will come as an afterthought.
Well, from there, I'll kind of pivot into, how do you, given the things we've talked about and kind of the new breadth of an impact of COVID, the new breadth of what we have to think about securing, Ken, I'll shoot it to you first. What are your thoughts about at-home workers? I mean, that's a broad topic again, and probably can be another show in and of itself. But what's the best way? What's your top way of securing an at-home worker?
Well, first of all, back when I was a director of IT with my leasing, I was forced to give people VPN connections for their own home PCs. Nightmare. I could not make the C-level understand, no, we shouldn't be doing this. A $300 computer, they wouldn't invest. So it's all got to be company equipment at home. Nobody uses their personal equipment, whether it's a phone or a computer or a laptop, whatever the case may be. You control it, you maintain it, you make sure everything's up to date, you make sure the patches are up to date. You're not relying on this person that probably doesn't really know anything about IT, and they can't do anything on that particular computer but work. They can't go to Facebook, they can't open remote emails, stuff like that.
That's a very good point, Ken. Paul, do you have any thoughts? We'll hit Paul and then we'll go back to George. But Paul, do you have any thoughts of securing the at-home worker?
Yeah, on that, it's really comes down to, and I think Kaylee asked a question about, how about securing their environment at home? A lot of times your firewall is set up to allow any connection out. And what really has to happen is you put in a firewall that we set up specific rules of what you allow out. Because a lot of times, the default in is block everything and a home firewall, but everything out. So now we have to start defining exactly what can get out. That way, if something happens inside, you can have it blocked, and the breach, they'll move on to another target because they're not getting what they wanted on the way in.
Right. George, thoughts?
Unfortunately, the train of thought kind of derails from time to time, but during this conversation, it's been stopping at a lot of the stations along the tracks. The Internet of Things is always going to be a challenge as we are making more and more devices that don't have the processing power to really build in a lot of overhead for additional security. A lot of the small WeMo switches and stuff just don't have that capacity. So that's always going to be a risk.
So George,
cameras,
do I need to worry about my refrigerator telling somebody that I have more than just Dunkin' Donuts coffee creamer in there on my keto diet? I mean,
I guess if you're that concerned, but I would just make sure there's no webcam in it. So, but yeah, I'll hand it over to Kenneth in a second.
Okay, yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
go ahead.
IoT is one of my favorite topics. I hate IoT stuff. How do you secure it? Put it on its own subnet where it can't jump anyplace else. Does it really need to get out to the internet? Does it really need inbound connections? You can shut that stuff down. You can get yourself an SSH connection into that network. So if you do need to access that light bulb or camera or whatever, you have a secure path in that only you know, provided you've got a secure path in with a good password. But just keep it off production. So if somebody does break into your equipment on your IoT side, they can't get any place. They can turn the light bulb on and off, maybe kill your refrigerator, but taking down your business, they don't have access to it. You can do that at home as well.
Yeah. If you've got the hardware that can support that. Not a lot of home equipment that you'll buy at Walmart is able to, so you have to do a little bit of forethought on that. I do know of putting a lot of those that are wireless on separate Wi-Fi networks just to be able to keep the traffic off. So,
Right. Let's see. Do we want to do one more question? We're at 12:45 here. Maybe we'll do one more question to kind of wrap her up a little bit here. And that question is like, what's one thing that a business can do today? What's one thing that they can do today to implement in their business to help them just become better? Maybe we'll wrap up on that. And what's a great first step? Ken, we'll go with you.
Okay. I think employee training. And when it comes to phishing mail training or spearfishing training, my understanding is from what I've read, after about 5 to 6 months, people have forgotten what you've trained. So maybe you could break your training out every 3 months. So every 3 months, you're retraining and retraining. So you constantly reinforce that. Unfortunately, someone will probably still open that email, but at least you are reducing the attack vector.
All right, George, what do you think? What's one thing that you would say impactful thing that a business could do to get out of the gates?
the most important first step, I would say, in all honesty, would be start defining what your policies are going to be. Do you have a computer use policy? Do you have an acceptable use? Do you have a company equipment or personal equipment? I agree on the phishing. That is one of the biggest attack vectors. But I have dealt with a situation where a company let people use their personal equipment. The person quit and wanted to keep the computer with all the data on it. So that's where I would come from with you have to have a clear definition of that, especially if you don't have something like that. I would almost be more concerned about those types of situations and then follow up with the phishing immediately too.
All right, Paul, your input on the impactful thing someone can do today. First step for today. What do you think?
First step would be passwords. Let's change your password. Let's make them more complex.
That's a good one. That's a good one, Paul. I like. I mean, they're all good ones, but
They're all good ones. Yeah, and obviously everything you can do all adds up to be more secure.
Right.
But when you say what's the first thing you can do today, we run into this all the time. We get into a new environment. It's like this password hasn't changed in years, not years. Not complex. So just make them a passphrase like Keith uses. I like donuts. So things like that. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
I love donuts. I think that one of the things that it kind of honestly strapes through our whole conversation, and for people who are IT folks and for people who are not maybe business users who are enjoying their session today with the power lunch, I think that one of the things that comes through clearly is that improving your security position doesn't need to cost a lot. And I think it's a journey, not a destination. I think it's important to understand that it's an ongoing thing and it's a mindset. But I think that one of the things that happens in today's world is when we go out and we seek help on security, all too often we're presented with scare tactics and things that maybe sour us to it when we see there's a ginormous price tag and this is complex and that's complex. But really, when we start thinking about it, when we start interacting and understanding the security threat landscape, we can become significantly better for no to low cost solutions. And maybe it's just a little help getting us there. Maybe it's just a little help on a consultative basis to get us there, but we can greatly improve. Changing passwords, how hard is that? It's the mindset. It's important to think about that. Mentally, we need to think about security and that it's an important thing. Any parting words from the panel? Go ahead and show I know, Ken, do you have anything that you'd like to wrap up with? We'll go around the horn.
Yeah, I can talk about this all day long. Uh, off of what Paul said, when you come to passwords, I mean, the most common even nowadays is 8 characters and down. So the bad guys are going after, if they're doing brute force, 8 characters and down in most cases. So if you can get your people up to 12 characters, which is just putting 2 numbers on the front end, 2 numbers on the back end, 2 special characters.
A phrase, yep, just a
They
phrase.
got the same
numbers.
password, except now they have these 2. It makes it so much harder to crack. And when you're talking policies, one of the things that always drove me crazy is, as an IT director, I didn't know who was being terminated until we really got on the rest of the department. So somebody's been let go. Sometimes it was a week or 2 before we even knew, and they still have access to the network.
Right. That's an important aspect of it. George, any parting words?
I'm sorry, I'm just now going through 20 years of memories of this person was already let go, especially remote employees. Those are the ones I didn't like the notification of. I would say 12 characters is a minimum. I actually, for anything that is sensitive, I prefer up to 16, just because there were some cracking tools that could split the password into 2 segments and then try to break them separately. But I don't know if that's been fully improved yet or not.
Yeah,
There's a
and a lot of times
Microsoft
people hear that and they kind of get freaked out, and I'll never remember that.
Oh,
And that's where I
and
like to have
that's-
a phrase. You use a phrase like, "I love donuts."
Phrase, song lyric. I actually highly recommend a good password manager. So you have only a handful of passwords that you need to really remember, and one master password, and then that tool can take care of remembering and generating truly random passwords. So finding a good password manager that you can trust and has been vetted is very important as well.
Very good. Paul, parting shot.
Parting shot would be even better. The next step is 2-factor. We have authenticator apps on our phone nowadays for almost everything that we do. I'm driven kind of crazy.
Not a far trip, but yeah.
Well, and yeah, so it's like I was just in that page. Now it timed out. Now I have to 2-factor into it again. It is a pain. Security is a pain, but it's really necessary. It really is just necessary. And I got to jump in on my time with HR is early on. As soon as that happened to me once, I would just go hang out every day, swing by HR and say, "Hey, anything going on? Anything going on I should know about?" Like, I can't tell you. I said, "Okay, well, when you can, tell me, so I can properly terminate them." It's just that social engineering piece matters.
Right. I think that security is a mindset, and being committed to it will definitely help your business, and you really have to in today's world. There's a lot of bad guys out there, and you want to protect yourself from them, and it really isn't. It really isn't. Doesn't need to be difficult or expensive to get yourself, well down the road. And it depends on the environment you're in, but I think that there's ways to improve your current security posture that aren't difficult or expensive to get started with. Again, I'd like to thank everybody for joining the Power Lunch today. I think this was a good session. Lots of good information. Thank the guys who are on the roundtable. Paul from NetVPro, George from Digital Nomads, and Ken from ITMS. Great job, guys. I really appreciate your input.